Okay, thus far all the videos we've been watching have all kind of been theoretically based. There are some skills that you can practice, but truthfully, what we're looking at now is going to start moving into you're going to be doing the work inside of Max, trying to utilize the things you've learned thus far, understanding unit setup, and a little bit about file management and how, what happens when you hit the word save, a little bit about the coordinate systems and how to place these objects. But now we're going to really get into the basics of creating. One more video before we start creating geometry, and that's one on basic manipulation. And even though through the various videos, you probably already caught many of the things I'm going to show you, now is sort of your official opportunity to understand what I was doing with some of these icons. We're going to use a simple box as our manipulation point here. And there are many things to consider here. In the main toolbar, you've seen me quite a few times use the move, but not so much the rotate or the scale tools. And that's where I want to kind of primary focus on this. This is basic object manipulation. We're simply going to move it, we're going to rotate it, or we're going to make it bigger or smaller by using the scale tool. And in order to move the tool, you have to select it and then choose the move tool. Or what you'll notice is if you take the move tool and it's active and you click on an object, it's already ready to be moved. Therefore, I may have mentioned it in the previous video where I think the selection tool is probably one of the least common used tools, because when you go to select an object, you're typically doing something with it, moving, rotating, or scaling it. So I've just kind of gotten a habit of doing that. And even if you're not going to move it, you're maybe going to modify it over here, I still have gotten into the habit of using the move tool to select an object. So please don't be confused in my videos when I do that. It's kind of been my multi-use tool is the move tool. So we select the move tool, it becomes blue, it's highlighted, the transform gizmo shows up. A little bit on the transform gizmo that I didn't cover at a different, in the previous video I just kind of told you a little bit about it. The transform gizmo is kind of, it's an important piece that you're going to become very comfortable with. So we select the object, we see the transform gizmo. The gizmo has 3 directions on it, the X, the Y, and the Z, depending on what view you're looking at. Right now, we are working in what we call the view mode. When you select an object, you're moving it in reference to the view you're looking at. I want to show you another one that's my favorite, and that is the local. Now, when you choose the local, you're not going to see a difference right away unless you're working in a very odd shape. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to go back into view just to stay consistent here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select on the constraints of the gizmo here. And that is, if I put my mouse right in this area of the gizmo at the top, it turns yellow, and I click down on my left, I can go ahead and move this object in any direction. I can move it pretty much 2 directions at one time by being in the top view. I can move it in 2 directions in the front view, or I can go ahead and move it in the left view. Now, when in the perspective view, you're seeing that you're kind of locked in again to one of 3 options here. You can't move X, Y, and Z all at the same time by using this gizmo. Now, let's say you want to move this box across the screen, but you want to keep it exactly on one axis. You can constrain its path or constrain its direction by choosing the actual arrow on the gizmo. So I choose the red arrow with my left mouse. As I drag, no matter where I move the mouse, it's only going to slide in one axis. I can do that over here as well. I can grab the green arrow on the Y, and it's only going to constrain up and down in one direction. This is going to be useful when you start cloning objects to make multiple copies, and you want them all in a nice line or an array. It's very important. But again, when you move, you put the gizmo down here in the yellow area, and you're going to move freely, where you can constrain the direction by holding one of the various arrows, and that can be done in any view. If I see them in the perspective, I'm only moving in one direction. Next, we have a rotate tool. And when you choose the rotate tool, your gizmo is going to change into a little wheel, and that wheel is like a steering wheel. And I have a lot of people that struggle with this tool because you got some freedom here. It's not as easy to constrain in a direction. So, for instance, we'll start in the front view. Think of this steering wheel, that yellow. If I click anywhere on that yellow steering wheel and I turn with my mouse, it's going to turn that object in that angle. I'm going to do an undo button here for a second. If I put my mouse on the center line, what it is I'm rotating in a front direction, and that's something different that you're probably not used to here, is we're trying to visualize this. And then of course I can also pull here and turn it sideways. So no matter what view I'm in, the gizmo is going to let me rotate in all three axes. The outer wheel is kind of a free form from the view that you're in. So you'll notice that even though I'm in this perspective view, it's kind of swinging in X, Y, and Z because I'm grabbing that outer wheel. One of the biggest issues that people have when working with the rotate tool is that if you bump something and it gets crooked, it's going to look really bad inside your scene when you actually start rendering it. It's going to look like a crooked wall, or your furniture is stuck in the floor, or something of that. And really, one of the most frustrating things is keeping your viewports nice and clean. And I use the word clean by you see that the box is a perfect square in the front direction. There's no accidental manipulation here. This is bad. This is poor, simply because it's not straight. It's not uniform, and we want to keep it nice and clean. So when you hear me use the word clean, that's what I mean. A lot of times people do that by manipulating the actual object inside the perspective view, and I discourage that highly until you get very comfortable with this tool. Now, to make this a little easier for you, I highly suggest, when using the rotate tool, turning on this icon, which is angle snap toggle. Angle snap toggle is going to limit your rotation to 5-degree increments, and you'll see that it's evident when you go to rotate. You'll see that number up there changing in increments of 5. But what's nice is if you bump this by accident, you can simply return it back. Okay, so enough with the rotation tool. Let's go ahead and move now into one that is it's helpful, but if you're building things to scale in the first place, you really shouldn't need the scale tool much. But you never know. The scale tool allows you to go ahead and make an object bigger or smaller, and we can do that by again, kind of using the same rules almost as the move tool. When the gizmo comes up here, if I put my mouse down inside this triangle and I hold down with my left mouse and I drag to the right, I'm actually uniformly scaling this object. So to kind of explain how this works, I'm going to make the box a perfect box here. And now you can see it's the same size in all directions. I'm going to go ahead and take my left mouse and I'm going to scale. And you'll notice that it uniformly scales in all directions. So the ratio of this box, the proportion of this box does not change. However, keep in mind, and I know we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here because we haven't talked much about object properties, you are not increasing the units of this object. And this can be very deceiving. By making this bigger, it's still, the original box is still 100, 100, 100, but you've manipulated it beyond that. This will not automatically update. In a future lesson, I'm going to show you how to go ahead and scale an object by pretty much locking in its units. So don't get confused there. Now we also have the non-uniform scale. And that, of course, is we want to scale it in one direction. And I can do that by coming over here to the gizmo, say in the Y direction, with my left mouse dragging up and down. And you'll see that I'm stretching this box in one direction. That's a non-uniform scale. Okay, where a uniform scale is all sides equal. And I can do that in both axes here. I can also come down here and stretch it this way as well by grabbing this and stretching. Okay, so we have our uniform and non-uniform scale, and both of those are really important because they're not changing the original the shape. So if you're not building, if you're building to scale and you do this, that could throw off. If you go back and measure this object by looking at its properties, you might be deceived by the number. It may conflict with other objects. So that's a little bit on the basic manipulation of an object for move, rotate, and scale. Now a couple more things I want to show you before we kind of get into basic geometry that's going to help you inside the scene. Number one, we're going to learn how to make object clones. We're going to be able to create an object and make more of them. For instance, maybe we're making a picket fence. Well, we can just go ahead and make one picket and then make an array or a straight line of them. So to kind of go a little bit more into that, we can clone an object by using the move tool by holding shift while we move. And what that's going to do is it's going to take and leave the original go, but then it's going to make a copy. Now there are some copy options here that I want to make, or should say clone options. I'm going to be clear about that. There are various clone options, and I want you to understand these moving forward. First, we have what we call a copy. And a copy is just that. It's a copy. It's not going to inherit any of the original, I shouldn't say that. It's going to inherit all the original properties, but from this point on, it's going to be its own entity. An instance, however, as we'll look at in a future lesson, means when we manipulate one object, the other object will manipulate equally. And I will describe that. Once we get into basic geometry, I will come back and revisit this. But we can also put a number of clones in there. So if I do 20 clones, it's going to equally space these clones the same distance that I move the first one from the second. And this is called an array. An array can be in a straight line, or we can do circular arrays as well. So I'll pull this out here, and let's say we want to do a circular array. We can do that using the rotate tool. So again, by holding shift and cloning, maybe I want to do this. I can come in and say I want 3 copies, and now if I select that and go over there, you're going to see these boxes are all stuck inside each other, but they're all independent. All right, so there's a little basic introduction to the cloning, and once we get into geometry creation, I'll come back in and share a little bit more with you. Let's say, for instance, though, we got one last thing. Let's say we want to make a copy of an object, but we don't want to move it. We want to leave it right on top of itself. Well, if you hold shift and move, you're going to slightly move this object. And yeah, you probably could come back down and type in the exact coordinates and line them up together. But what I'd like to show you is another option, and that is Edit, Clone. When you choose Edit, Clone, you have the same cloning options you do when you hold Shift. But there are 2 objects right on top of each other right now, so if I move that, you'll see that they were right in the same location. And that's important. Some other tools that are going to be very helpful for you. Once you start getting your scene very big and complex, you may need to start hiding certain objects to get them out of the way while you work on other objects. Now, yes, we could go into the wireframe mode here and start working wireframe, but this is still very confusing for many people. So what I'm going to do is kind of show you how to hide an object, and I'll make this one a different color just for argument's sake. So we can see that these boxes are kind of overlapping. If you want to temporarily hide an object, you select that object and right-click, and you're going to get this rollout. Now, there's a lot of neat things in here that we'll look at later. There is a move and rotate and scale option here that takes you a little bit beyond the tools that we've used. The one thing I want to show you here is we have the clone option, but we also have what we call a hide and unhide feature. So we can hide the selected object, which is going to make that object disappear. Now, we didn't delete it, it's still there. But we can work on this object, and then when we're ready to unhide, we simply right-click in a gray area, and we can do an unhide all or unhide by name. So if I do that, it's going to come up and say, okay, box 002025 is the only object hidden. So I'm going to hit on hide, and it's back. So it's important to name your objects so that when you go to hide them, you know which ones to unhide. We also have, when you right click, we have a freeze option, and this is really cool. Let's say you're building something and then you're done with it, and you don't really want to hide it, but you don't want to accidentally select it. You can freeze it. Now it changes gray, and that's okay. We're not going to worry about our colors right now. You're not really changing the color of the object. It's simply in the viewport showing you it's a frozen view. But now I cannot select on that object at all. But I can grab this object because that one was not frozen. So no matter what I do, it's stuck there. To unfreeze an object, you simply right click and hit unfreeze all. And that will allow you to now go back and be able to manipulate this object. So in this lesson, I went through quite a few different manipulation methods, moving, rotating, scaling. I did show you briefly, when you select an object, how to go up and change its axis here. And we're going to look at that in a future lesson when it's more relevant, when there's a need for it. But we also have our ability to hide and freeze objects. But the most important thing to consider is naming your objects when you actually want to do this so that you can have more control over that. In the next lesson, we're going to begin creating some basic geometry, and we'll move forward in the class.